Do you remember Secret Army supplies? If you're under about 40 years old, or your parents had better things to spend money on, you might not. This was a toy line where everything looked like a normal piece of military kit. This was back in the day when every boy's toy was either a primer to join the army or a prelude to an interesting future as a tabletop wargame reenactor. There was a compass, binoculars, a hand grenade, and then you'd open it up and inside was a tiny secret army base filled with military personnel that you could play with. And I wanted one of these things so badly, and eventually I got one. I got the Torch, which transformed itself into a helicopter airbase with its own searchlight. And it was rubbish. I mean, it wasn't particularly well put together. The plastics were bad. The Torch, I remember, you picked up the handle and the bottom bit flopped open like a Retroid Flip 2 with a broken hinge. Let's just say this toy line didn't live up to the expectations implanted in us by the adverts. And I'm bringing that up because when I first picked up the RG52 Mini in its military green colourway, it was that toy line that I couldn't help but remember. And toy is actually a very apt thing to say about the RG52 Mini because it has the same slightly unhinged military aesthetic. It has vents that don't actually vent anything. It's got bezels everywhere, screw heads that are visibly, visible. And it looks like something that I would have pestered my mum and dad for when I was about 7 years old. You could have a real blast with the RG52 Mini, which is more than I could say about the Secret Army Supplies hand grenade. And when I first saw this, I was actually a little bit confused by it because most of the devices that we're used to seeing right now have got better plastics or they've got these sleek glass panels across the front. And then I was reminded of all of those comments from people who don't want sleek glass panels across the front, who just want something that they can pick up and play, and that maybe something that doesn't shatter the moment that it's dropped. Something that you could just hand to a kid and say, here you go, without getting that sense of dread that the next time you see it, it's going to be in several bits and covered in cat sick. I had to find out if there was a place for this device. And what I found depends very much on the price that you eventually pay for it, but we'll have more on that a bit later. Now, you might be confused by the name RG52. This isn't an Ambonic device. Instead, this is by AISLPC, which is such a convoluted name that for the rest of this review, I'm just going to refer to them as the company. Although that does make them sound like some shadowy organisation from the 1950s sci-fi movie. This isn't the first time that we've seen something from the company. They were the people behind the R36T, that handheld that looked a little bit like an old-fashioned television. You know, the one that you could get with a wood effect casing. And this time, they appear to be tackling the 16:9 market with this widescreen device, which has a 5.5-inch IPS display, a gaming capability of up to PSP, and Hall effect triggers. This might not turn into a secret army base, but it does open up the world of PlayStation Portable and some of the fantastic titles that you had on it. I've been putting this through its paces for the last few weeks to figure out whether or not it really is any good at PSP, whether you can throw everything N64 at it, and whether or not you actually need two Linux front ends, or whether one of them's just for show. So we have to ask ourselves the big question. Is the RG52 Mini worth soldiering on with, or is it something which should put us in full retreat? So, before we start, I need to have a quick word about this device because out of the box, the games that you will play will be stretched to full screen, which obviously doesn't matter for 16:9 content, but it does matter if you want to play 4:3 content, or even 3:2 content at the right aspect ratio. I'm going to show you how to fix that right now, because I don't want to spend the rest of this video in the wrong aspect ratio. I've tried that once before, and I ended up looking fatter than I actually am. All you have to do is open up any game that opens in RetroArch. So something from your PlayStation catalog will do the job. Hold down the select button and X, press B, and you'll see another menu appear. Go down into settings and then across to video, press B, head to scaling, aspect ratio, and change that to core provided. You can then back out by pressing the B button until you get to that side menu again, then go to the main menu, quick menu, resume, and you're back in the game. The setting will be auto-saved. We can then close this game down and get on with the rest of the review. Now, this review unit has been sent over by the company, but no payments have changed hands, and all of the thoughts are my own. Not even my therapist will take responsibility for those. My first impressions on unboxing the RG52 Mini was actually that it feels quite cheap. It feels like a toy. The plastic isn't quite as nice as some of the other devices at this price point. Run your hands along the edge and the machining is somewhat sharp and not quite as refined as other companies have provided. And this is a shame because the ergonomics on this are actually really very nice. You've got two bumps on the back which your hands just fit into, and your thumbs fit comfortably over the sticks and buttons. I could quite happily play like that for hours. That is, unless I'm playing a D-pad-centric game. And the company made the decision to put the joystick at the top on this one. On a console that mostly plays games where you're going to be wanting to use the D-pad, that can make things a little less comfortable, but it's not insurmountable. I do think that there are a great many gamers who've actually been asking for this particular configuration in cheaper devices. Well, here it is. In terms of specifications, you've got that 5.5-inch IPS panel that I mentioned earlier, and that runs at 1280 by 720p with a 16:9 screen. Underneath, you have a Rockchip RK3562, 2GB of RAM, a single microSD slot, a 3.5mm headphone jack, mini HDMI out, and USB-C for both charging and connecting accessories. The heart of this, though, is the 5,000 mAh battery, which translates to somewhere around 5 to 6 hours of playtime. It's a big battery. It's a good one as well. Depending on the system that you're emulating, you'll get a lot of gaming out of this. You also get two analog sticks in the Xbox position. They're not Hall effect, but they do have RGB lighting, meaning that you could also use this as an effective Christmas decoration. Less Xbox, perhaps more Xmas box. The triggers, however, are Hall effects, something that I know a lot of gamers will be very pleased about at this price point. But unfortunately, it's in the controls where that cheap toy feeling starts to creep back in again. The D-pad, for example, seemed very angular, not particularly comfortable. It did pass the Kirby pancake test, but I also did find it pretty difficult to hit the diagonals on this, especially during fighting games. Luckily, though, your joysticks are calibrated to the D-pad, so you can use that instead. And whilst that isn't going to suit everybody, there are plenty out there who just won't mind. The joysticks themselves are fine, but for this price point, we've actually started to see Hall effect sticks being used, and these, well, they just aren't. These are the normal sort of Joy-Con sticks, and having these older sticks means that they're more likely to drift like a Japanese car in a snowstorm. The RG52 is not alone in that, though, and we have to be honest that these are no worse than a lot of other sticks on the market right now, even in some much higher priced devices like, well, the Switch and Switch 2. The complete opposite of that is the Hall effect triggers, which, although a little bit clunky, actually do give you a lot of control in-game. They're fairly comfortable, they seem to fit in just the right position, and they do their job admirably. The membrane-style face buttons are fine for what they are. They actually sit quite close to the shell, and that does give you this feeling of a button that doesn't quite feel like it's been pressed. You know, I like to feel when a button's been pressed. But I don't have any actual problems with them, not really. You know, when I was gaming, everything seemed to work okay. And I have to say, I like the styling of them. I like the colour of them. As well as that, you've got the select and start buttons on the bottom of the console and home and back buttons on the top of the console. And since my thumbs are right next to the home and back buttons, I constantly find myself hitting that back button and exiting a game instead of starting it. I think that's what they call premature evacuation. The speakers are downward facing. You know, over the last few months of testing out devices, I think my stomach has had a better audio experience than I have. This isn't unusual on a lot of devices right now. At least here they are loud enough for it to not matter that much. And of course, you've got the headphone jack if you want a more immersive experience. The device doesn't have any actual active cooling unless you blow on it. But where you end up holding this device, that doesn't matter at all because it never gets hot. Where it does get hot is right at the center of the screen. And if you run your hand over it about 20 minutes after you start playing a game, then you will feel it. Although it's not particularly unpleasant to the touch, it's nothing that's going to burn you. And it does suggest to me that actually this is working within its tolerances. I don't think you're going to get any problems because of the heat generated here. And all you have to tolerate, of course, is that 5.5-inch IPS display that I mentioned earlier. You know, I'm actually quite impressed with this. It is a really nice sized screen with colours that seem to be bright and vibrant, not too washed out, which you can get with LCD panels, and it sits comfortably with some of the other devices at this price point. And it outperforms some of them as well, especially that one on the Pocket Air Mini, which everything else hardware-wise is pretty standard, except for the power button, which you can press and hold to turn it on, and then press and hold again to switch between the two operating systems, Emulation and RG Box, one of which is said to increase performance, but we'll come to that a little bit later on. Before I do, I would like to tell you about today's sponsor. And if you want to have that pub darts experience at home without all of the sticky carpets, then you might want to take a look at Pixel Darts by DartsNut. This thing is an electronic darts board which takes care of all of the scoring for you. So there's no mental arithmetic after too many beers. You've got loads of darts-based games built in, and you can even use it with Nerf guns, so the kids can join in without you having to redecorate afterwards. For the hardcore gamer, you can even hook up a Bluetooth controller and play some Pico 8, and the developers have said that they plan to add in new things using the DartsNut app, so the device is going to keep improving over time without you needing to do anything complicated. If you're interested in stepping up to the Oki, you can find links in the description below, and you can also get an extra 2% off if you use the coupon code Mr. Stephen. But if you're not somebody who performs well at darts, then maybe the performance of the RG52 will entice you instead. Of course, the fact that this will play everything PlayStation 1 and below is not headline news, but this thing can handle PSP at 2x scaling, although there's a caveat to that. I had some really strong results with Dreamcast. On the cheese scale, I'd say we're about at a strong mature cheddar. It's quite a strong performance. Whilst it didn't always hit the frame cap, nothing actually felt unplayable. And of course, you've got those Hall effect triggers for the games that need them. One thing to note is that you will want to use GDI or CDI formats instead of the CHD format that you would usually find on emulators. N64, on the other hand, is more Swiss cheese. It's good whilst you can taste it, but it does have a few holes. It's not a fully playable experience. Your bog standard games, your Mario Karts and Super Mario 64, they're going to run perfectly fine. But the stuff that emulation often has a problem with, things like Cruising USA, GoldenEye, Conker's Bad Fur Day, are not going to be playable here. Even Super Smash Bros. Had so much stuttering, you'd have thought that the game was running on vinyl. But It's PSP where this shines. This is the camembert of systems. It's rich, it's creamy, and it cooks, running many titles at 2x resolution. Some titles will still struggle, of course. Things like God of War, even when I dropped that down to a 1x resolution, I still wasn't getting the best gameplay, and I found that the emulation was only running at times at about 98%. But playing things like Burnout Legends, Ridge Racer, Little Big Planet, Grand Theft Auto, all running at 2x resolution, well, I think you've got a solid reason to consider this for PSP titles. You might even be able to get a little bit more out of it if you spent some time tinkering, because I only had a few weeks to look at this. You also have to decide which front end you want to use, because you've got a choice: Emulation or RG Box, and I've tried games out with both of these launchers to see whether or not one of them would give you a meaningful difference. What I found was that it was identical, and in fact those are just two front ends that are slapped over the emulation stack, which includes RetroArch and PSP and Stilt. Sorry, I think I'm getting too much cheese. Anyway, when I changed the settings in RetroArch under Emulation, and then I opened it up in RG Box, nothing was different. The settings had still remained changed. So you're going to get identical performance between these two systems because they're running the same thing. Now, we all know what you're going to get with Emulation and Emulation Station, but the story here, of course, is RG Box. This is their own front end, and it actually looks quite good, a little bit like the interface for the TrimUI products, but it's a little bit locked down, and it's missing some features that you would expect to have on more mature operating systems. Having said that, I really liked the look and feel of it, and the only real problem with the setup out of the box is that you're going to miss things like Portmaster. Over time, I think this could end up being a real competitor. But of course, if you don't want to wait, you do have an option. You could install the very new Dark OS, which has a version for this very device, and I may make a video about that in the coming weeks. Out of the box, then, this is actually a really good experience, and once you stop the aspect ratio making everything look like a funhouse mirror, which is easy enough to do, everything pretty much just works. And that's really what you want from a Linux device. So here you have this PSP playing gaming toy built for a little bit of roughhousing. You've not got a glass front to smash on this one, and it comes in at around about the $70 to $80 mark, if you can get some discounts and cash back on AliExpress. In terms of power, this sits just above Ambernic's H700 series, which gives you considerably more room to push this into the PSP catalogue. For $30 more, you could pick up the TrimUI Smart Pro S, the Mangmi Air X, or the RG Vita, but none of them have got this big a screen, and analog triggers, and HDMI out, and sit at this specific price point. I'd save around about $30 by getting this device over any of the others that I've just mentioned, and that's $30 that you could put towards an SD card. And you have to weigh that up as to whether or not the extra performance that you get on the other devices are actually worth it for the extra money. You know, I'm sure a lot of people are going to say, yes, it is. I'm sure a lot of people would choose that performance. But I also know that some people would value a device that you think is going to open up and have a bunch of toy soldiers fly out of it. That's what I think, anyway. And I would love to know what you think in the comments below. Please do leave a comment, leave a like when you're down there as well, and subscribe if you haven't. And if you'd like to support this channel and everything that I do, then you can, of course, become a member on Patreon or join this channel as well. There's a membership thing here, and there are links in the description. Or I'm told that you could leave a thing called a super thanks, but I'm too old and I don't really know what that is. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed yourself, and I hope that you will come again next time we enter the Retro Corner. Until we do, thank you ever so much for coming along. Thank you for watching, and cheesy gaming.